I was sitting in my doctor's office at 35 weeks pregnant, ankles swollen to the size of tree trunks, when the certified mail arrived. And the receptionist handed me the thick envelope with that apologetic smile they reserve for bad news. My name was typed across the front in formal black letters, Hazel Michelle Simmons Rivera. The return address made my blood freeze, Hartwell and Associates Family Law. The baby kicked hard against my ribs as I tore open the envelope, as if she could sense what was coming. Inside were divorce papers. Not a conversation, not counseling, not even a fight. Just cold, legal documents demanding the dissolution of our 7-year marriage, filed while I was carrying his child. My hands shook as I read through the petition. Brandon wanted 50-50 custody of our unborn daughter. He wanted half of everything we'd built together. He wanted out, and he wanted it before she arrived. The timing wasn't accidental. At 35 weeks, I was too pregnant to work my demanding job as a forensic accountant, too dependent on his insurance, too vulnerable to fight back effectively. But what destroyed me wasn't just the betrayal. It was the calculated cruelty of it. He knew I'd be at this appointment alone because he'd suddenly developed important client meetings that coincided with every prenatal visit for the past month. He knew I'd be off work on bed rest, financially dependent and emotionally fragile. He knew I'd be trapped. The nurse called my name for my appointment, and I carefully folded the papers back into the envelope. My obstetrician, Dr. Martinez, noticed immediately that something was wrong. My blood pressure had spiked, and my hands were trembling as she tried to measure my belly. "Hazel, honey, is everything okay?" she asked gently, her experienced eyes taking in my obvious distress. "My husband just served me divorce papers," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. "But the baby's fine, that's what matters right now." Dr. Martinez's face hardened. In her 20 years of practice, she'd seen this before: men who abandoned pregnant wives, who chose the worst possible timing to blow up their families. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" she asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. "I'll figure it out." But even as I said it, I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Brandon had underestimated me. He thought I was just another pregnant wife, too overwhelmed and dependent to see his moves coming. He thought I'd been too focused on nursery prep and baby clothes to notice the signs. He was wrong on all counts. My name is Hazel Michelle Simmons Rivera. I'm 32 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was a senior forensic accountant at Mueller and Associates, one of the most respected investigative firms in the city. I specialize in tracking down hidden assets and financial fraud. I've helped expose embezzlement schemes worth millions, traced money through offshore accounts, and built cases that put white-collar criminals behind bars. I took a temporary leave to focus on the final weeks of my pregnancy, but my skills hadn't gone anywhere. What Brandon didn't know was that those pregnancy brain moments he'd been joking about were actually me paying very close attention to things that didn't add up. The new credit card statements that stopped coming to the house. The business trips that didn't match his usual travel patterns. The way he'd started taking phone calls in the garage. The mysterious improvement in our bank account balance right around the time I went on bed rest. I'd been building a file on my own husband for weeks, and now I knew why. Truth is, I wasn't surprised by the divorce papers. I was surprised by the timing, but not by the fact itself. Brandon had been pulling away for months, ever since we found out the baby was a girl. He'd wanted a son, had been vocal about it, and when the ultrasound revealed otherwise, something shifted in him. The changes started small. He began working later, claiming new projects at his engineering firm. Weekend plans became optional for him. He'd bow out of family gatherings, friends' events, even my baby shower planning meetings. He stopped asking about my day, stopped rubbing my feet when they swelled, stopped talking about baby names or nursery themes. Then came the financial changes. Our joint checking account, which had always been transparent, suddenly had gaps. When I asked about a large withdrawal, he'd get defensive, claiming it was for baby stuff or work expenses. But I never saw receipts, never saw the purchases. Money was disappearing, and his explanations were getting thinner. The phone behavior was the biggest red flag. Brandon had always been casual with his phone, leaving it on counters, asking me to check messages while he was driving. But suddenly it was password protected, always face down, always within arm's reach. He'd take calls in the bathroom, on the porch, anywhere I couldn't overhear. When I mentioned it, he accused me of being paranoid due to pregnancy hormones. There were the social changes too. Friends of ours would ask me how Brandon was doing with questions that seemed loaded, like they knew something I didn't. His sister stopped calling. His coworkers' wives became awkward around me at company events. It was like everyone was walking on eggshells, and I was the only one who didn't know why. The most telling sign was his complete disengagement from anything baby-related. He'd skip OB appointments, claiming work conflicts. He showed no interest in setting up the crib, choosing a pediatrician, or discussing maternity leave logistics. When I'd try to talk about the birth plan or postpartum arrangements, he'd change the subject or find urgent tasks that needed his immediate attention. Looking back, I realized he'd been planning his exit for months. The divorce papers weren't a spontaneous decision, they were the culmination of a careful strategy. He wanted to file before the baby arrived so he wouldn't be responsible for delivery costs. He wanted to establish his own residence before establishing a custody routine. He wanted to divide assets before adding a dependent to the mix. But here's what Brandon didn't know about his forensic accountant wife. I don't just notice financial irregularities for a living, I investigate them. And for the past 6 weeks, while he thought I was nesting and preparing for motherhood, I'd been quietly building a case. So I made some quiet moves of my own. First, I had secured copies of all our financial documents. Bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, tax returns, everything was photographed and stored in a secure cloud account that Brandon didn't know about. I'd also opened my own checking account at a different bank, slowly transferring small amounts that could be explained as grocery shopping or baby preparation expenses. I documented every suspicious behavior with dates and times. Late nights at work that didn't match his office building's security logs. Weekend golf games with people who, when I casually asked at parties, hadn't seen Brandon in months. Credit card charges that didn't match his claimed activities. I'd built a timeline that painted a clear picture of deception. Most importantly, I'd been in contact with my own attorney. Not the family lawyer we'd used for our wills, my own advocate. I'd explained the situation as a hypothetical at first, then gradually revealed more details as the evidence mounted. She'd been preparing for this moment too, and she was ready to move fast. I'd also been quietly rebuilding my professional network. Colleagues from my forensic accounting days, private investigators I'd worked with on complex cases, legal contacts who specialized in high-conflict divorces. I'd been setting up my own support system while Brandon thought I was isolated and vulnerable. The final piece was technological. I'd installed monitoring software on our home computers and network, legally, since they were jointly owned. I'd been tracking digital activity, online purchases, email patterns. Everything Brandon thought he was hiding, I was quietly documenting. When I got home from the doctor's office that day, our house felt different. The walls seemed thinner, the furniture looked temporary, the life we'd built together felt like a stage set that was about to be struck. Brandon wasn't home yet, another late night at the office according to his text. But this time I knew it was probably his last. I sat in the nursery we'd painted together just 2 months ago, surrounded by tiny clothes and unopened baby gifts, and opened my laptop. It was time to make some calls. My first call was to my attorney, Rebecca Walsh. She'd been expecting this moment, and when I told her about the papers, she didn't sound surprised. "Hazel, I need you to listen carefully," she said. "Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't leave the house. We're going to respond to this filing, but we're also going to file our own motions. And based on what you've gathered, we're going to request a full forensic audit of your marital assets." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew. Someone doesn't file for divorce at 35 weeks of pregnancy without having planned ahead financially. He's been moving money, Hazel. The question is where and how much. My second call was to Jack Rivera, a private investigator I'd worked with on several cases. Jack specialized in domestic investigations, and he had resources I needed. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said when I explained the situation. "I've been watching your husband for 3 weeks. You what?" "Rebecca hired me. She wanted to be prepared." "Hazel, we need to meet. Tonight if possible. There are things you need to know before he gets home." An hour later, Jack was sitting at my kitchen table with a manila folder thick with photographs and documents. What he showed me was worse than I'd imagined. Brandon wasn't just planning to leave me. He'd been systematically draining our assets and hiding them in accounts I knew nothing about. He'd taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, forging my signature on documents. He'd liquidated my retirement account and transferred the money to an offshore investment fund in his name only. But the financial betrayal was just the beginning. The photograph showed Brandon with another woman, not just casual meetings, intimate moments, apartment visits, weekend trips I'd been told were work conferences. She was younger, obviously not pregnant, and based on the timeline of their relationship, he'd been cheating for at least 4 months. Her name is Jessica Martinez, Jack explained. She works at his firm, junior engineer. They've been careful but not careful enough. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, airline tickets, he's been using a credit card he thought you didn't know about. I stared at the photos, feeling strangely calm. The baby kicked, and I rubbed my belly absently. How long have you known? 2 weeks for certain. But Rebecca wanted to wait until we had everything documented before telling you. Hazel, this isn't just infidelity and financial fraud. He's been planning to leave you with nothing. The timing of the divorce filing is designed to maximize his assets and minimize his responsibilities. But he doesn't know that I know. Exactly. And that's our advantage. That evening, Brandon came home acting normal. He kissed my forehead, asked about my doctor's appointment, and made dinner like nothing had happened. He didn't mention the divorce papers, probably expecting me to bring them up in tears and confusion. Instead, I played my part perfectly. I was tired, uncomfortable, focused on baby preparations. I complained about my swollen feet and asked him to help me reach something on a high shelf. I was the vulnerable pregnant wife he expected me to be, but while he was in the shower, I photographed his phone. While he was watching TV, I copied files from his laptop. While he slept, I searched through his briefcase and found more evidence of his hidden accounts and his relationship with Jessica. By morning, I had everything I needed. The investigation I launched wasn't just personal, it was professional. Rebecca had connected me with a team of specialists, forensic accountants to trace the hidden money, computer experts to recover deleted files, and investigators to document the full scope of Brandon's deception. What we discovered went far beyond simple divorce planning. Brandon had been involved in a scheme at his engineering firm to overcharge clients and split the excess profits. The money he'd been hiding wasn't just our marital assets, it was proceeds from criminal activity. He'd been using our joint accounts to launder money, making me an unwitting accomplice to fraud. The forensic audit revealed that over the past year, Brandon had diverted nearly $300,000 from our marriage and his company. He'd been setting up a new life with Jessica, planning to start fresh with stolen money while leaving me to deal with the legal consequences of his financial crimes. But the deeper we dug, the more we realized this wasn't Brandon's first time. Background checks revealed a pattern of behavior dating back to college. He'd borrowed money from friends that was never repaid, had been involved in a financial aid fraud scheme, and had left his first serious girlfriend after draining their shared savings account. Jack's investigation into Jessica revealed she wasn't an innocent victim either. She'd been involved in the company fraud scheme, helping to create false invoices and manipulate billing records. They'd been partners in more than just romance, they were co-conspirators in a white-collar criminal enterprise. The pattern was clear: Brandon targeted financially stable women, used their resources to fund his schemes, then moved on when the relationships became inconvenient. I was just the latest victim, but I was also the one with the skills to fight back. As the investigation expanded, we realized the implications went far beyond our marriage. Brandon's engineering firm was unknowingly employing 2 people who were systematically defrauding clients. The clients who'd been overcharged deserved restitution. The partners who'd trusted Brandon deserved to know about his criminal activity. What started as a divorce defense had become a federal case. Rebecca contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division. The evidence we'd gathered, financial records, communication intercepts, witness statements, painted a clear picture of ongoing fraud conspiracy. Federal agents were interested. Very interested. Meanwhile, I was coordinating with Brandon's employer. The managing partner, someone I'd worked with peripherally on a previous case, was horrified to learn about the billing fraud. An internal audit confirmed our findings. Brandon and Jessica had been systematically inflating project costs and pocketing the difference for nearly 2 years. The scope of the case was growing daily. Other victims came forward: previous girlfriends who'd lost money, clients who'd suspected billing irregularities, coworkers who'd noticed financial discrepancies. What began as my personal betrayal was becoming a landmark fraud case. But through it all, Brandon continued his charade at home. He brought me flowers, rubbed my back, and talked about baby names. He was still expecting me to meekly accept the divorce terms and disappear quietly from his life. He had no idea that federal agents were building a case against him, or that his financial crimes were about to be exposed. The irony wasn't lost on me. While he thought I was helplessly preparing for single motherhood, I was actually coordinating a multi-agency investigation that would destroy his carefully constructed new life. 3 weeks after receiving the divorce papers, everything was in place. The FBI had enough evidence for criminal charges. Brandon's employer had enough evidence for termination and civil action. Rebecca had enough evidence to not only deny his divorce terms but to demand full restitution and alimony. Most importantly, I had enough evidence to protect my daughter from growing up with a father who was a criminal. It was a Tuesday morning when everything came together. Brandon left for work as usual, kissing my forehead and reminding me to rest. He had no idea it would be his last day of freedom. The plan was carefully coordinated. At 9 a.m., FBI agents would arrest Brandon at his office for fraud and conspiracy charges. At the same time, agents would arrest Jessica. At 9:15, Rebecca would file our response to the divorce petition, including criminal evidence and a motion for full asset recovery. At 9:30, Brandon's employer would suspend both defendants and begin damage control with affected clients. I watched from my living room window as unmarked cars positioned themselves around our neighborhood. Federal agents were ready to search our house for additional evidence. Everything Brandon had hidden, stolen, or concealed was about to be exposed. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Jack Rivera. "It's done," he said simply. "Brandon and Jessica are in custody. The search warrants are being executed now. Hazel, you did it." But the real moment of reckoning came 3 hours later, when Brandon was allowed his one phone call from jail. He called me, his voice shaking with disbelief and desperation. "Hazel, there's been some kind of mistake," he started. "They're saying I stole money, that I committed fraud. You have to help me. You have to call Rebecca and tell her this is all wrong." I let him talk for a full minute before responding. "Brandon," I said calmly, "I know about Jessica. I know about the fake invoices. I know about the hidden accounts and the forged documents. I know about the second mortgage you took out on our house. I know everything." The silence on the other end was deafening. How could you possibly? I'm a forensic accountant, Brandon. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $300,000 disappearing from our marriage? Did you think I'd just accept divorce papers at 35 weeks pregnant and not investigate why? Hazel, please. I can explain everything. I can make this right. Don't let them destroy our family over this. You destroyed our family when you started stealing from me. You destroyed it when you started cheating on me. You destroyed it when you filed for divorce while I was carrying your child. I didn't destroy anything, I just documented it. But the baby, you can't let our daughter grow up thinking her father is a criminal. Our daughter is going to grow up knowing her mother didn't let anyone steal her future. She's going to grow up understanding that actions have consequences and that the people who love her will always fight for her. Brandon was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from him before, small and broken, he said, "What do you want from me? I want you to plead guilty. I want you to make full restitution to everyone you've stolen from. I want you to stay away from me and our daughter until you've served your time and proven you're a different person. And I want you to sign the uncontested divorce papers that Rebecca is filing tomorrow. And if I don't, then we go to trial and everything comes out. Every detail of your fraud scheme, every hotel receipt with Jessica, every forged document. Your name will be in the papers. Your family will know everything, and you'll serve the maximum sentence. Your choice." The next morning, Brandon's attorney contacted Rebecca to discuss a plea agreement. Within a week, he'd confessed to everything. The fraud charges, the money laundering, the document forgery, all of it. He agreed to full restitution, a 5-year prison sentence, and an uncontested divorce with no custody claims until he completed his sentence and parole. Jessica received a similar sentence. Brandon's engineering firm terminated both of them and implemented new financial oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. The clients who'd been overcharged received full restitution plus interest. The morning after Brandon signed the final divorce papers, I went into labor. 8 hours later, I held my daughter for the first time. Naomi Hazel Simmons. I'd reclaimed my maiden name, and she would start life with a clean slate. She was perfect, healthy, and born into a life free from the chaos her father tried to create. Dr. Martinez visited us in the recovery room. "How are you feeling, Hazel?" "Tired," I admitted, "but free. Finally free. You know, in 20 years of delivering babies, I've never seen anything like what you've accomplished. Most women in your situation would have been destroyed by what your husband did." "I had advantages he didn't count on," I said, looking down at Naomi's sleeping face. "I had skills, I had allies, and I had something worth fighting for." 3 months later, I returned to work at Mueller and Associates. My case had attracted attention in the forensic accounting world. It was being used as a teaching example in law schools and business programs. I'd been contacted by several organizations that help victims of financial abuse, asking me to speak about recognizing warning signs and protecting assets. Naomi came to the office with me every day for the first few months. My colleagues were incredibly supportive, and having her nearby made the transition back to work easier. She was a happy baby, easygoing and alert, and she seemed to thrive on the energy of the office environment. Brandon's sentence was reduced to 3 years in exchange for his cooperation in exposing additional fraud at his former firm. He wrote me letters from prison. Apologies, promises to change, pleas for a second chance. I didn't respond to any of them. He'd had his chance to be a father and husband, and he'd chosen crime and infidelity instead. The financial restitution allowed me to buy a house in Naomi's name, establish a college fund, and invest in our future security. I also started a foundation to help pregnant women who face financial abuse, providing legal resources and emergency support for those trying to escape dangerous situations. 6 months after Naomi was born, Brandon's appeals ran out, and his conviction became final. The divorce was complete, the assets were divided, and our old life was officially over. I celebrated by taking Naomi to the park and teaching her to feed the ducks. That evening, as I rocked her to sleep in our new nursery, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, trusting, vulnerable, completely unprepared for the betrayal that was coming. I'd been that woman for 32 years, assuming that people who claimed to love me actually had my best interests at heart. But I'd learned something valuable through this experience. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. When everything I'd built was threatened, I didn't crumble. I fought back with intelligence, strategy, and determination. I protected my daughter and myself using skills I'd developed professionally and wisdom I'd gained through pain. Naomi stirred in her sleep, and I smoothed her dark hair gently. She would grow up knowing that her mother was someone who couldn't be taken advantage of, someone who fought for justice, someone who turned personal devastation into professional triumph. More importantly, she would grow up understanding that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, that trust must be earned and maintained, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your child is refuse to let them grow up in a toxic environment. As I looked out the window of our new home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Brandon had tried to destroy our lives to build his own future with stolen money and another woman. Instead, he'd given me the opportunity to build something stronger than we'd ever had together. Naomi and I were going to be just fine. In fact, we were going to be better than fine. We were going to be free, secure, and surrounded by people who actually cared about our well-being. Brandon's betrayal had been the worst thing that ever happened to me, but fighting back had been the best thing I'd ever done. The divorce papers he'd served at 35 weeks pregnant were supposed to be his victory and my destruction. Instead, they'd been the beginning of his downfall and my transformation. He'd underestimated the wrong woman, and now both our lives were forever changed. His for the worse, and mine for the better. Justice, I'd learned, doesn't always come from courtrooms or legal proceedings. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be a victim, from using your skills and intelligence to protect what matters most, and from building a life that's stronger than anything anyone can take away from you. Brandon had started begging when he found out what I was capable of, but by then it was far too late. The woman he'd married was gone, and the woman who'd emerged from his betrayal was someone he'd never deserved and never truly known. Naomi and I had a future to build, and we were going to build it on our own terms.